Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Hit Your Numbers. Before we get started, I've got two important announcements for you. One is we have new memberships for the Sales University. We now have Learn, Develop, and Master. Each membership is designed to give you something different, but also help you hone in on those core sales skills that you are going to need to become a top seller. So go and check those out on the revenueenabler.com. Secondly, we have a Discovery Masterclass coming up. This is happening on the 18th of September. There are limited spaces, so go and check those out now. If you go to the revenueenabler.com, click on the Learning Hub at the top, you will see masterclasses, so you can sign up for the Discovery class on the 18th of September, and then you can see all the other masterclasses there as well. Enjoy the show.
Cool. All right, Katie, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. So, Katie, we've been working together for about 6 months now, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. We're going to talk about a couple of different things that you found over the last 6-9 months that you've been working on as a sales rep to improve skills and ultimately sales performance. But just before we get into the conversation, maybe just give the listeners a bit of an introduction to like your journey in sales, the role that you're in now, maybe the product that you sell, the markets, personas that you sell it to, just to give the listeners context, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me, James. Super flattered and excited to be here. I'm Katie. I'm originally from the States, but moved abroad to Spain many years ago and started working in sales out here, specifically really with the UK and Ireland markets. So I'm an AE right now at a company called MBAT. And basically I sell to typical personas in finance, such as finance directors, CFOs, VPs of finance, treasurers, and I sell a solution for kind of back office finance automation and treasury automation. And I've been in sales roles over the past 5+ years, everything starting from SDR, BDR, kind of starting in smaller segments of kind of an AE role, and now on to more mid-large market AE. And that's where I am currently.
Awesome. So you have that luxury. I remember when I was selling marketing tech once, and one of my prospects was the VP of marketing and the CFO. Really random, like never, ever seen that before. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "You've got the good and the bads. The good is I love technology and I love what you sell. The bad thing for you is I'm the CFO and I hate letting go of money." And it was a really fun sales cycle. We had a lot of fun. I think he was playing with me quite a bit. And we won the deal. It was a great relationship. So I guess like you've got the luxury of selling directly to the CFO, not waiting for them to get involved later, but you've also then got to make sure you deliver really early in the sales process, right? Because if they're involved early or in the second call, you need to make sure that you really, blow them away. Otherwise, the deal could be dead before it even gets started. Is that what you kind of feel?
100%. Yeah, I think it's funny because you're selling to the people who control the money and also are potentially looking to spend the money. So you need to make a really good case because you're kind of already directly working with that economic buyer. And it's not like I have to build the case for, the head of marketing or the head of sales and how we're going to present this to the CFO. It's, pretty much already directly there with them. So it's a very different kind of sales experience. I didn't always sell to CFOs directly, so it has been a bit of a pivot. But it's also sometimes nice because they're very straightforward with you about what they want to do, when they want to do it.
Yeah, and I know you've seen like significant improvements over the last like 6 or 9 months in the way that you sell. I wonder if that's because you're selling to the CFO. Like when I started selling to HR, I definitely became a better seller because they didn't have a seat at the table, didn't have budget to execute. So I had to really think about it. I guess you're approaching those conversations differently because they're the CFO or the VP of finance or like a finance role. So you need to be thinking about outcomes, ROI, value, that kind of stuff, because if you don't, they're going to be pushing you for it. And if you're not prepared, you're going to lose trust and credibility. Do you think that's helped you become a better seller selling to this persona?
Yeah, I think it's made me have to really be on top of kind of outlining the impact of what we're doing with them, because these are the people who are looking for the budget themselves, approving the budget themselves. It's a totally different ballgame than it is selling to any other role, in my personal opinion. I think ultimately, though, sometimes you come across people in finance who they themselves don't know if they have the budget, and you still have to create that business case and create the ROI from scratch. So it's not always straightforward, but it is nicer to kind of, again, be working with those finance roles more from the get-go than you would in another sales process.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I know the three things that you wanted to really focus on today is like relationship building, deepening connections, and understanding and uncovering pain points and impacting in that business case piece. But just before we jump into that, something you mentioned there is really important. Sometimes a lot of people think like, oh, the economic buyer is going to be the CFO because they've got the key to the safe. I've been in exec meetings where the CEO has looked to the CFO for approval because they know the funds and the runway and things like that, cash flow. But also, like, the CFO has also looked at the CEO sometimes, said, "Hey, I want to invest in this like finance tool or this ERP tool to like make sure things like flow more effectively," and they're looking for the CEO's approval. So don't just assume because the CFO literally holds, all of the credit cards and everything and signs like the, pushes through like the payments, like that's not always the case. Like, they will sometimes look at other people. Depends on the maturity of the business, right? So qualification there is just so important. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I just worked on a deal recently where, like many cases, we don't usually have access to the CEO. They have to sign off in the end, but it's hard to manage that sometimes because you're speaking to the CFO. They say, "Yep, I'm going to put budget towards this." They like, the business case you've built. They're confident that you're going to help them solve their problems, but you still forget there's always going to be another person or more people that are even higher up that still have to give their green light. And sometimes it's out of your control. And that's sometimes really difficult to manage, for sure.
100%. So one of the things that I really wanted to get into is this relationship building part, because I think the world we live in today is very different to, like you mentioned, like you've been in sales for 5+ years. Like 5+ years ago, you could pretty much sell, I don't want to say anything, but like it was a lot easier to get deals through, right? Especially to like SaaS companies or like VC backed companies. Money was just readily available. They would just take a punt on something, even for like a cool experiment, where now like everything is like properly looked at. So obviously relationship building is important, because if I'm going to go to bat for you, I want to make sure that like this isn't a mistake. So from your perspective, what do you think's like been the shift in your approach to relationship building today versus like when you first got into sales? Like, how's that evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started in sales, I feel like I thought relationship building was more about small talk and getting people to like you and finding something in common, right? Kind of how we approach making friends in our daily lives, right? And while that's not unimportant, I think it's important, of course, that you get along with the people you're working with and that they enjoy speaking with you. I think now it's much clearer for me that when someone comes to you, it's for, whether it's for your solution or for your service, whatever you're selling, it's because they genuinely have a problem or a challenge they need help with. And if they knew the answers, they would have done it themselves. So they're coming to you because you're an expert and you're someone who is confident in what they're saying. You've helped solve this for other people similar to them. So yes, it's important to be personable and to exchange pleasantries and talk about the weather and the things that we do at the beginning of meetings and calls. But I think the most important thing about relationship building is making sure that whenever you're having a conversation, they leave thinking that they got value from it. So you have given them advice, you have shared insights with them, you have shared stories from how you helped others succeed in the same exact challenges or problems they're facing. So it's more about actual problem solving, and rather than kind of running through your generic sales script that you typically would have done years ago. So yeah, I think it's much more about building a deeper trust with that person or with those people, rather than flattery. And I think that's how I've changed over the last years for sure.
Yes, Katie, say it louder. Let's get billboards going with this. Like, left with value. That's so important. We actually got somebody sign up to Sales University the other day because they found us through ChatGPT.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
people can find, I know, it's cool, right? It's super cool. I was like, wow, that is really awesome. But like, people can get information now from anywhere, your website, McKinsey Co, Gartner, Forrester, ChatGPT, whatever it is, right? LinkedIn, forums. that kind of stuff. Like if they're speaking to you, it's because they've got a question that they're not 100% sure on the answer before they go and raise it internally. They want to get it validated. Let's make sure that they walk away like learning something. Like come with your point of view, bring insights like commercial teaching, things like that. Make it a valuable interaction. Otherwise, like people will ghost you because they're like, well, what's the point? Like I don't need Katie and shouldn't add anything to the conversation. So there's that. And also like something you mentioned a minute ago, which is spot on. I like underlined it very aggressively. Like prospects don't want more friends. Like I've got plenty of friends. I don't need the rep to jump on calls and tell me like that they noticed that I love McLaren F1 team or that I'm into golf and did I watch the PGA at the weekend. Like I'm talking about that with my buddies. Like if I'm jumping on the call with you, I've got a small window before my next call. I want to know, do you understand my world? Do you solve the problem that I have? And do you have evidence to support that you can solve it? If you do, cool, we can chat. If not, I got to go, buddy. So stop thinking about building friends. Like, yes, have like a human conversation, but they want trusted advisors. They want somebody, if they're going to put their name to something, it's not going to damage their internal reputation. And it's awesome to see that you talk about things like leaving with value, because, that probably leads us into the next part around like building trust early versus like traditional sales habits of like trying to get people to like us. What do you do before a discovery call or before a demo to make sure that you can start that evaluation process around like building trust and credibility? Is there anything that you do like 9 out of 10 times?
Yeah, I would say before I have any call, even if it's, ideally you've done it before, but even if it's, 20 minutes before your meeting, just make sure you've done your homework and you've looked into company updates, looked into what role they're in, make sure you understand the common challenges or pressures that they face, come up with hypotheses about all of this research you've done beforehand about what you think you could help them with. But also on that point, don't go in assuming that you know what their challenge is going to be. Just do the homework, prepare yourself for kind of basic background information that you should know about them, their company, and what they're likely trying to solve. And then that way you'll feel much more confident in that initial introductory call to kind of guide them through the process and see if you could even potentially help them. Because sometimes you get on an introductory call and you realize that maybe it's not a fit, which is also okay, but just be prepared.
Yeah, 100%. I've just been recording, funnily enough, before the session, an episode on demos and like how to execute world-class demos. And like one of the points that we stressed significantly is the importance of like good pre-call planning. If you take like an actor, let's take like James Bond, for example, when he's recording a scene of a movie, he can make as many mistakes as he really needs to. Like, he can't make 1,000, but he can mess up about 5 or 6 times, right? And then go, let's go again, let's go. Sometimes they probably take an entire day to really nail a scene. When we're selling to like the CFO or the VP of marketing or the head of HR, whatever it is, like we need to nail that performance, right? And if we're going to nail it, we need to be prepared. So like, again, there's AI now, but before, like I remember jumping onto sales calls with prospects and being like, hey, Katie, I was just taking a look through the annual report, your most recent one. And what I noticed on page 17 was around this big initiative around this. Like, can you help me understand, like, where are you up to with that today? What progress has been made? Where's the gaps? And, what are your team focusing on? Some people are like, I've not read the annual report.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I was at BT, I never read our annual report when it got published. But a lot of salespeople would have read the BT annual report if they were selling to us, right? So again, that helps me build trust. It elevates me as a seller, helps me start to build some credibility and authority, and people then want to listen.
It's funny because it's actually not that difficult. It's pretty simple now. We have so many tools online and so many ways to redact information quickly. So why not take 15, 20 minutes of your time to just find kind of the top 5 things that you should know about that company. In my case, when I'm selling to CFOs, the CFO helped write that annual report. So having read that and understanding what actually they would have put in their own words on that report can have a huge impact on the conversation you have. It might not change the world, but at least it shows that you are genuinely engaged and you were looking forward to that conversation rather than showing up like every other sales rep that typically just kind of has their checklist of traditional questions. They're ticking off every box and it's just boring for that other person. At least you show that you were curious. And I think people really appreciate that.
1,000,000%. And it's always like, even if you get to like page 2 or page 3 on the annual report, right, there's usually like the finance metrics. there, right? Around like revenue, operating profits, things like that, EBITDA. Like even if you're like in your world telling to the CFO, like they definitely had some input on those. Like, hey Katie, like just before we jump into the conversation too, I was taking a look at the annual report. Looks like, operating profits improved by X%, compared to the previous periods, and that might form my hypothesis depending on what I'm selling. It might identify a risk or a challenge, and they might be trying to improve that. And I've got a way of doing that through like efficiency or whatever. And it's just a really nice transition to build some authority. So, and that's a nice segue actually into the next thing that we want to talk about, which is really how do you like understand pain points. And one of the questions I've got for you is like a lot of sales reps unfortunately treat discovery a bit like a checklist. In CRM, there's fields they have to fill out that their boss is like on them all of the time. So they just tick through them as quickly as they can so they can do their demo or their presentation. Like, what's your approach to discovery, but going deeper without it feeling like an interrogation?
Yeah, I definitely used to do that all the time. I would enter a new position and I'd ask the sales team, what are the kind of 10, 15 questions you need to have answered once you get off that first discovery call? And I would ask them very directly, how many entities do you have? And how many, whatever the questions are. And when I think back to that, it is just so cringy to think that I was going into calls with people who have, decided to spend 30, 40 minutes with me out of their really busy day, asking them things I could have asked them later in the process on a spreadsheet to be able to provide them a proposal that's not really going to change or move the needle in this opportunity. It's not going to kind of reveal the pain points that they have. So I think uncovering pain points is, for me, not just about kind of what the prospect is saying to you on the call when you're asking them questions about, walk me through what is really painful for you right now. What are the challenges your team is facing? It's also about paying attention to how they say it, both in tone, but also in body language. Even if all of our meetings are virtual right now, you can tell a lot, even through the screen, if someone is hesitant to answer a question or they're not quite sure or the tone of their voice changes. I think watching those cues, those emotional cues, can actually really help you know when you should ask deeper questions. So sometimes if I reach one of those points, sometimes I'm pretty direct. I'll say, listen, what happens if we don't solve this? What is the impact if we don't do this tomorrow or in the next 6 months? And if people have an answer, then I know they're really engaged and this is seriously a priority that they want to solve. Sometimes you get the answer you don't want, which is, nothing really happens. Everything stays the same. Well, maybe then that's not the problem. Maybe you should go back and reevaluate and kind of ask them new questions to try and find what is their pain and if you can actually solve it.
1,000,000%. So I wrote down a couple of things that you nailed there. So be very intentional with your questions, right? You'll see this in the Discovery Ready course you have access to. I talk about like problem, root cause, impact, not like digressing into lots of different conversations. You nailed it again earlier. You spoke about like how many entities do you have? There's this old school saying that still rings true today. If it's in print, you should know the answer. How many salespeople do you have on your team? Like, if you would have gone to Sales Navigator and put in 2 filters, you'd have known that. Like, maybe like 1 or 2 people have left, right, and it's not updated, but it's going to be fairly close. You're not going to be 50% off, right? You could use that in your frame and be like, hey, Katie, I noticed that you're running a sales organization with 17 people. How are you able to make sure you're getting around the group plenty for like one-on-one coaching, deal reviews, that kind of stuff? Rather than saying like, how many reps have you got? I'm leading with that insight to open up a conversation. They might be like, well, it's actually not 17 anymore. We've actually got 14 people, but yeah, it's a real struggle. I just don't have the capacity to do it. And then I'm, again, going into what issues does that cause? How are you measuring those issues? Is it win rate, pipeline coverage, attainment? So like really, really spot on. If it's in print, you should know the answer. Ask GPT, spend like 5 seconds having a look on the internet, get those answers, and then ask very intentional questions that get you into the problem, what causes that problem, and the cost of the problem. And if you do that really well, you can do that in like 10, 15 minutes. Then you can spend the next 10, 15 minutes talking about how you solve the problem, evidence that you have you can solve it, and talking about, best next steps, who should be involved, when should that happen, Like, is that something you're seeing like is really helping you improve discovery, is just being very intentional with what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. I think part of it is, again, doing your homework. And a lot of these things you can find if you know that your ICP is a company that has a multi-entity structure and works in minimum 3 countries, and whatever the criteria may be, you can easily find that information usually, and then use that to hypothesize what you feel might be their challenges. And one thing I'll say on this is, of course, we'd like to think that everyone's going to open up and tell us their deepest, darkest secrets on these calls. But sometimes you get people that are a bit hesitant to do so. They don't know you. You're trying to build trust. And one thing that can also help if you feel like things are a bit tense or they're not willing to go deeper when you ask them questions, I try to sometimes relate to other scenarios where I've helped people with similar challenges and say, hey, I was helping, James with this problem that him and his team were facing. What we did was XYZ, and this had this impact. Are you feeling or are you seeing the same thing in your team? And that way it gives them an answer to say, no, correct you, because people love to correct people. They love to be the one in charge.
Love it.
So they'll correct you and say, no, this is what's happening. Or they'll agree, and then you'll have used that story as a way to get that answer from them. Because not everyone is really comfortable kind of just spilling, all the details of their challenges, right?
Absolute banger that is. And again, you'll know in the course I talk about different discovery starters. So like using a hypothesis, which, by the way, it's okay to make assumptions, guys, if you build them to go and get them validated. If you make an assumption and keep it to yourself and don't get it validated, that's really bad practice. So the one is that Katie mentioned there, which is really elite, which is like building an account hypothesis, jumping onto the call, builds instant credibility, gets you into problem discovery fast. If you've made a mistake, that's cool because it shows you've gone out of your way. People love to correct us, and then they'll give you the problem. Win-win, right? The other way is using curiosity, like, hey, Katie, I can't imagine it's every day you hop onto a call with a salesperson. Maybe you could just give me some context into what challenges your team are running into that you need to solve in the next couple of quarters that made you want to meet with me today. Opens them up. But what you're talking about there is what I call the story starter. So like if you're running an outbound, so let's say you're an inbound rep and then you get some outbound as well, like a story starter could be great for you, because if you're building new category sales org, you're going out to the market and they've never heard of your category before. Jumping into discovery, like a problem question, might not be the best approach for you. 1 or 2 slides that tell your, story, your point of view, and use as a customer in that story, it can get them to feel comfortable because you're using one of their peers in the discovery. And then people feel comfortable opening up because they feel like they're not being judged as the only person that struggles, right? And they're like, like there's other people that are suffering with this. This person seems to have a solution. Like maybe if I share something with them, they can help me as well.
Totally.
Like, that's a champion. So yeah, just think about like discovery. Sales in general is not like one. There's not just one way to do it. There's a bunch of different ways. You got to find one that works for you, and then one that's relevant to the customer and their journey and context and things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and hey, I could probably think back to even just a month ago or so when I tried all these things and it was still really awkward and they did not want to tell me what their pains were. So this is something I still am improving on day by day. I've definitely improved ever since, honestly, working with you, James, and looking at these different kind of strategies to helping dig deeper. But yeah, it's still going to happen. It's not like this is a magic fix.
You're human. I still make mistakes every now and then, right? We're just human beings. That's why like long-term knowledge retention really comes from just continuous reinforcement. Keep going over things, keep practicing it, ongoing coaching. It's so important. Just before we jump into the last topic, I know this is something you're really excited about. It's something you're investing a lot of time in at the moment. It's around business case. You said something earlier I just want to come back to because it was so spot on and I kind of brushed over it. Was you were talking about like what they say, how they say it is really important. So like the tonality. When someone's talking about something that's a problem, sometimes you can tell by body language, which again is harder over Zoom, easier in person, but body language, you can hear in their voice like it's emotional. If it's not, doesn't mean it's not a problem, but maybe it's not as serious. The other thing is I wrote down is what are they not saying? If I ask like a really big impact question and they're not really plugging the gaps with stuff that I'm used to hearing when deals go into closed won, I'm then going to use that and be like, hey, Katie, typically when we have this conversation around this specific thing with other CFOs, what they usually tell me is this metric is underperforming by this much, or this is really struggling, which is causing this like challenge across the organization. Maybe I didn't ask my question very effectively, so apologies there. But are you seeing this in your world as well? So like being so present in the conversations critical, because what are they saying to me? How are they saying it? What are they not saying? And do I need to plug that, not put words in their mouth, but try and guide them? Yeah, like we call this like lead the witness, like guide them into the conversation we want to be having. Because if you sell to like the VP of HR, before the VP of HR hopped on that discovery call with you, they might have just been firing somebody in the meeting room next door. Like their head's not in it. Like if you're speaking to the CRO, they literally might have jumped on the call before looking at a spreadsheet with their forecast and scratching their head going, we're not going to make it. We're going to hit like 68%, and they're stressing out over it. So I have to guide them into the conversation that I want to be having. So it's not about putting words in their mouth, but it's guiding. Again, would you kind of agree with that? Do you feel like that's been something you've been working on over time?
Yeah, exactly. That's so spot on. Actually, what you were saying is, at the end of the day, we're speaking to people, and we have no idea what they've just come out of. They might have just come out of a really tough board meeting. They might have just let someone go on their team. They might be having a personal issue. They might have a family member who just passed away. Like, you have no idea what's going on. I know that I show up to work and I have things going on outside of work, and I still have to do my demos and make my calls. And I think we need to be really conscious that, don't take everything so personally, but try and dig deeper when necessary and kind of pick up on those cues, because it might not actually be that you're not, you know, hitting the challenge straight on. Because if you know your ICP, you know the current trends, you know probably more or less out of these 5 things they're experiencing 2 or 3 of them, but they're not kind of exposing that to you. Maybe just reframe the question and you might be able to get there. Sometimes people just need a little bit of hand holding to to get to that point. And everyone has a really different personality. So, I'm very direct. I'm kind of higher energy, and that might not be every single person I'm speaking to, and that's okay. So I also think when you're paying attention to the emotional cues and tonality of that person, also learn to shift your own, because that might be how you kind of lower the amount of tension in the room or kind of make them feel more comfortable. Because again, I might be a lot of energy for other people, and I might need to tone it down myself when I speak to certain, personas.
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to being really self-aware, right? Being present, knowing, what the other person is like, being able to read them very quickly, and then trying to mirror them, not to like try and, fool them and manipulate them or anything like that. But again, like some people might not respond well to a specific approach, and that's why we need to have a couple in our back pocket that we can pull out and that we've practiced and that we feel comfortable using, which takes time, so that we can have a great conversation with, as many people as we physically can. Yeah, spot on. So just before we kind of wrap up, I know we want to talk about business case. And in our coaching call the other day, you mentioned that business cases have become a bit of a game changer for you. What do you, so anyone that's listening, like, what would you say, like the real definition for you of like a good business case is? Like, what is it? What isn't it? What does kind of one look like for you without giving too much away?
Yeah, sure. That's a really packed question. It's hard to give a single definition, but I would say probably whatever your business case looks like, because it can look many different ways. And it's not just about, is it in a perfectly packed, format, whether it's slides or a document or however it is. I think that as long as you have a clear link between what is the problem that you're helping solve, what is the cost of inaction of them solving that problem, and probably like how are you going to help them measure those benefits and reach those outcomes. I think those are kind of the main things that your business case should touch on. There's of course a million ways to do it and visualize it, but I think linking all of that and linking that early on is really important, so that people are not confused already 2 minutes into reading your business case.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I love that you're like really grabbing this with two hands at the moment, because I think more and more people are starting to realize that to win over the CFO or whoever the economic buyer is, they're getting loads of these requests all of the time. And they used to just like, yes, sign these things off, but it's becoming harder now. So if it doesn't scream, come and buy me, like we call them like CFO ready business case, that kind of stuff, right? I didn't invent that, but I just love the name of it. It's like, how do I talk directly to someone in finance? And you nailed it. Like, what's the problem? What's the cost of inaction? What's causing this problem? This is a really key one. Like, I always use this example. You're probably sick of hearing me say it, but like, if I look out into the garden right now and like one of the rose bushes is dying, there's petals everywhere. That's a problem. I can't solve that without understanding what's killing the plant. So it could be that I've forgotten to water it for 2 weeks. It could be that I planted it on the wrong side of the garden where there's no sunlight. Maybe it's in a pot and it's too tight and there's not enough room for the roots to grow, so it's dying. So if I know that, I then can take action to solve it. And that's what CFOs care about. Like, it sounds great, we have this solution, great that we have a problem statement, but do we really know what's causing this problem? Because if I'm going to go and spend 100 grand, 50 grand, £1,000,000, I want to know that we're spending it to solve it completely, to solve it at the core. What I don't want to do is, like, you probably all see this at the listening, like there's classic like buckets, there's like GIFs or memes, and there's like leaky buckets and people put like plasters over it and they just peel straight off like 2 weeks later, right? Finance are sick and tired of that because it's just like costing them money. So what's the problem statement? What's the cost of our problem? What's causing the problem? What's our plan to solve it? And then how will we measure success? And if you can nail that on 1 or 2 pages of a Google Doc, a slide deck, like Kate said, it doesn't really matter. But as long as you nail that early, then you're going to keep their attention. Yeah, the reason that like certain like businesses explode from like their blog or social media is because when they write content, they're thinking about hooking the audience, like with a really good hook, and then they're trying to sell them on every single line. So they read one line, they feel like really hooked and attached to it. They want to read the next, then they read the next, then they read the next. So it's the same with the economic buyer. They're getting loads of leads. If you don't hook them, really grab their attention, they're just going to say things like, "Hey, Katie, it kind of makes sense. Do you think we can do this in like 6 months? You know, we've got all these other projects on and money's a bit tight." They just don't understand because we've not made it easy for them to understand. So always opt for clear, not clever, when it comes to the way that you're going to position the offer to your prospect.
Yeah. And I think for me specifically, and anyone else that specifically sells to finance personas, finance is often a department that I think they're probably one of the last to ever get budget approved for new solutions. I think whenever you look at what solutions are probably prioritized, they're ones that are impacting the customer experience or are more customer facing impact. So, marketing, sales, these types of departments often will be prioritized. So for me, I feel like there's even a bigger challenge because getting a system or service approved for a finance department, it's hard to prioritize that in a company.
Yeah, totally. And, they're always saying no to things. So if they then go into an exec meeting, like, I know I've rejected the last 7 things that have come through, but I want to spend the money, like they need to have a really solid business case, right? So that probably makes your job that little bit harder when they also need to drive consensus in the customer's org to get that thing approved. Just before we wrap, so you've been in sales now for just over 7 years. Like, if you had to go back to day one, like what advice would you give yourself to improve the quality of sales process that you ran from prospecting all the way through to like late stage deal negotiation and closing deals? Like, what would that like 1 or 2 pieces of feedback be?
Yeah, I think this is obviously personal and everyone will have their, their own answer to this. But I think for me, again, it's your job is not to necessarily impress them. Your job is to help these people succeed. Ultimately, you're selling to people. They are putting their reputation on the line when they're recommending you to their CFO, CEO, saying, "Hey, we need this solution." They could be bought into you. They could be bought into all the demos you've done and the product you've shown them. But ultimately, I think kind of focusing again on providing real value and solving their problems and making sure you're supporting them throughout the whole process, not just finding the problem, showing them the demo, but also helping them build that business case and even take on work from them by creating slides or whatever is needed, helping them throughout every single step of this to make the buying process easy is way more powerful than anyone could imagine. At least much more powerful than what I could have imagined, 6 years ago.
Nailed it. I wrote down help your customers be successful. I mean, that's what our job really is in sales, isn't it? I know we've got a target, commissions, a career to build, that kind of stuff, but it does get a lot easier when we genuinely want our customers to be successful. If we don't really care about what it is that we do, maybe we're probably selling the wrong thing. But then you nailed the next part, and I'm writing a lot of content about this at the moment, is around like proper champion enablement. It's tough today to get things over the line. I talk about this a lot around the way that we buy has evolved. Again, you used to be able to like sell to one person, they would just sign it off with their budget, or at least they just like run it by someone just to double check and it would get approved. Now, like everyone's like risk averse, they've been burnt, they've made all these mistakes. They start to build culture around collaboration, which is great. But what that does is it forces the organization to buy that way. So like when a business case goes to the COO might be like, it sounds great. Have you ran this by finance, my team in operations, IT, and the sales organization? Because it's going to also affect those businesses. They now need to go and have different conversations with those different stakeholders and those different people. And you need to help them go and do that. And in some of those teams, there's going to be what we call enemies, right? They don't hate you, that kind of enemy, but they're like, well, I've got this different initiative that I care about. So Katie's selling, finance tech to the CFO. I might be selling, call recording software to the head of sales. Two budgets, but they all come out of one pot, right? So like that person might be like, this sounds good. It sounds expensive. I'm desperately trying to get this thing over the line. Like, how do I derail this project? And you need to help that person figure out how to overcome that, objection handle internally, give them content that illuminates the value that you have, the business outcomes that you generate, so that your deal goes across the line. Because for probably the first half of my sales career, I lost so many deals that I could have won if I just did a better job of enabling someone to go and tell the value story across the organization and get this deal approved.
Yeah. And that's sometimes scary because you're not in that meeting very often. So you need to make sure that even you feel confident that that person representing you is going to do a damn good job. So it's in your best interest, it's in their best interest that you put yourself in their shoes. What do they have to present? And would you, if you were them, feel comfortable presenting with all the resources and information you've given them? If the answer is no, then probably you need to go back with your champion and sit down and walk through it together. I think it's a much more collaborative process than people realize. And I think people really appreciate when you say, hey, I've prepared all these things for you, but I've sent it to you in an editable format because I want it to be in your language. And I want you to feel like you actually helped me write this business case or whatever it is, because then that person's much more invested, and then they'll probably represent the business case much better. So I definitely think the one thing you said that's spot on is this is a collaborative way, a consultative way of selling that I think a lot of people didn't do even just some years ago. There's a big reason why there's so many consulting firms and consultants out in the world. There's a reason why so many companies spend so much money on consultants. Why are we not approaching sales in the same way?
Right? You got these big consulting firms that people will spend tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of pounds with, and they trust them because they become experts and they build authority and credibility in the way that they operate, right? So I think there's a lot we can learn from that. I think that's probably a big skill that sellers need to adopt. And the real cool thing, guys, is you can get courses and coaching on this stuff, but you can also go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, I want to just be more consultative in my selling approach. I sell this technology to this persona. I run this sales process and I'm going to meet these different stakeholders. Like, how can I level myself up to be seen more as a consultant, not just a salesperson? It's not going to give you everything. That's why, we work together, right? So that we can help you level up in those areas and then like soundboard and coaching, things like that. But you can get, a good head start on that stuff and start to make some progress. So yeah, like that's such a killer bit of advice. Awesome. Really enjoyed this conversation, Katie. Thanks for hanging out. I hope everyone got some good value from this. If you have any questions, or want to go follow Katie, highly recommend it. Yeah, thanks for making the time and hanging out today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Super fun. Thanks a bunch.
Awesome.